Imagine building a life from nothing, escaping poverty, achieving success, and creating a home filled with trust and love. Now, picture that world shattering in an instant. For Todd, a self-made programmer, the betrayal wasn't just personal, it was a calculated strike by the people he trusted most. His wife, Judith, and his two childhood friends, Philip and Allan, had woven a web of deceit behind his back. But Todd wasn't the type to crumble. Instead, he orchestrated a plan so meticulous, so cold, that it left everyone questioning, was it justice or was it vengeance? Todd's story began in the shadows of hardship. Growing up in a rundown neighborhood, he watched his parents struggle to make ends meet, their dreams slipping further away with each passing year. But Todd was different. He had a fire in him, a relentless drive to escape the cycle of poverty. While his childhood friends, Philip and Allan, were content to coast through life, Todd spent nights hunched over textbooks, teaching himself to code on a secondhand computer. His hard work paid off. By his early 30s, he was a successful programmer, living in a spacious home with Judith, the woman he'd vowed to love forever. Judith had been his rock, the one who believed in him when no one else did. And Philip and Allan, they were supposed to be his brothers, the friends who'd stood by him through thick and thin. But as Todd's star rose, their lives remained stagnant. Philip drifted from one dead-end job to another, while Allan's charm seemed to be his only currency. Todd tried to help them, offering jobs and advice, but they never seemed to take it seriously. Still, he never imagined they'd betray him. After all, they were family, or so he thought. Little did he know, the cracks in his perfect life were already forming, and the people he trusted most were about to shatter it completely. It started with a casual comment, the kind that slips out in passing, but lingers in your mind like a splinter you can't quite remove. Todd was mowing the lawn one Saturday morning when his neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, leaned over the fence. "I don't mean to pry," she said, her voice tinged with hesitation, "but I've noticed Philip's car parked outside your house a lot lately, always during the day when you're at work." Todd paused, the hum of the lawnmower fading into the background. He forced a smile and thanked her, brushing it off as nothing. But the thought wouldn't leave him. Why would Philip be at his house so often? He hadn't mentioned anything about stopping by. Todd tried to rationalize it. Maybe Philip was helping Judith with something, or perhaps he'd just forgotten to mention it. But as the days turned into weeks, small inconsistencies began to pile up. Judith's phone would buzz at odd hours, and she'd quickly silence it, offering vague excuses. She started dressing differently, paying more attention to her appearance, even on days when they had no plans. And then there were the late nights. Judith claiming she was working late or meeting friends, but coming home with a distant look in her eyes. Todd's mind raced with possibilities, each one darker than the last. He tried to push the thoughts away, to trust the woman he built his life with, but the seed of doubt had been planted. It grew, gnawing at him until he could no longer ignore it. One night, as he lay awake staring at the ceiling, Todd made a decision. He would find out the truth, no matter the cost. The next day, he ordered a set of hidden cameras, his hands trembling as he clicked purchase. It was a line he never thought he'd cross, but the fear of not knowing had become unbearable. Little did he realize, the truth would be far worse than anything he could have imagined. The cameras arrived in a plain brown box, unassuming yet heavy with implication. Todd's hands shook as he unboxed them, the weight of what he was about to do pressing down on him. He spent hours meticulously placing them around the house, in the living room, the hallway, even the bedroom. Each camera felt like a violation, not just of Judith's privacy, but of the trust that had once been the foundation of their marriage. But the doubt had consumed him, and he couldn't turn back now. For days, he checked the footage obsessively, his stomach churning with a mix of dread and hope. Maybe he was wrong. Maybe there was a perfectly innocent explanation. But deep down, he knew better. Then one evening, as he sat alone in his home office, the notification popped up on his laptop. Motion detected in the living room. Todd's heart pounded as he clicked on the live feed. At first, the screen showed nothing unusual, just Judith tidying up, her movements calm and unhurried. But then the doorbell rang. Judith's face lit up in a way Todd hadn't seen in months, and she practically skipped to the door. When she opened it, Philip and Allan stepped inside, their laughter echoing through the house. Todd's breath caught in his throat. This wasn't a casual visit. The way they moved, the way they looked at Judith, it was too familiar, too intimate. His worst fears were confirmed moments later. Judith led them to the couch, her demeanor shifting into something Todd didn't recognize. She leaned into Philip, her hand resting on his thigh, while Allan sat close beside her, his arm draped over her shoulders. Todd's vision blurred as he watched, his chest tightening with a mix of rage and heartbreak. The audio picked up their laughter, their whispered words, the casual ease of their betrayal. It was as if Todd didn't exist, as if the life they built together meant nothing. He couldn't look away, even as the scene unfolded in ways he'd never imagined. Judith, his wife, the woman he'd loved and trusted, was entangled with not just one, but both of his childhood friends. The men he'd grown up with, the ones he'd called brothers, had stabbed him in the back without a second thought. Todd's hands clenched into fists, his nails digging into his palms as tears streamed down his face. The room felt like it was spinning, the walls closing in around him. He wanted to scream, to smash something, to confront them right then and there. But instead, he sat frozen, watching the footage over and over, each replay driving the knife deeper. By the time the screen went dark, Todd was a different man. The love and trust that had once defined him were gone, replaced by a cold, calculating resolve. He didn't just want answers, he wanted revenge. And he would make sure they paid for what they'd done. The days that followed were a blur of sleepless nights and simmering rage. Todd replayed the footage obsessively, not because he wanted to, but because he needed to. Each time he watched, the betrayal cut deeper, fueling a fire that burned away any remnants of the man he used to be. He no longer saw Judith as his wife or Philip and Allan as his friends. They were traitors, and traitors deserved to pay. But Todd wasn't impulsive. He knew that acting out of raw emotion would only lead to mistakes. Instead, he began to plan, coldly, methodically, and with a precision that mirrored his work as a programmer. His first step was research. He scoured the internet for ways to disappear, to make someone's life unravel without leaving a trace. That's how he found Mr. Keller, a shadowy figure who operated in the gray areas of the law. Keller's name popped up in obscure forums, always accompanied by warnings. If you need something done, he's your guy, but don't ask questions you don't want the answers to. Todd reached out through an encrypted channel, his message short and to the point. I need 3 people taken care of. No violence, just consequences. Keller's reply was equally cryptic. Understood. Meet me at midnight. Come alone. The meeting took place in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. Todd arrived early, his nerves frayed, but his resolve unshaken. Keller emerged from the shadows like a ghost, his face obscured by a hood and his voice low and gravelly. He listened as Todd laid out his plan, nodding occasionally but offering no judgment. When Todd finished, Keller simply said, "It'll be done. But remember, once this starts, there's no going back." Todd didn't hesitate. He handed over a stack of cash and a folder containing everything Keller would need: schedules, addresses, and photos of Judith, Philip, and Allan. The plan was set into motion a week later. Judith was the first to disappear. She left for what she thought was a weekend getaway, her bags packed and her spirits high. Philip and Allan were next, lured by a fake invitation to a high-stakes poker game. None of them suspected a thing. By the time they realized something was wrong, it was too late. They woke up in the middle of a desert, miles from civilization, with nothing but the clothes on their backs and a single bottle of water to share. The sun beat down mercilessly, and the vast emptiness stretched in every direction, a cruel mirror of the isolation Todd had felt when he discovered their betrayal. Back home, Todd monitored their progress through updates from Keller. He didn't feel joy or satisfaction, just a cold, detached sense of justice. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about balance. They had taken everything from him, and now they would understand what it felt like to have nothing. As the days turned into weeks, Todd waited, knowing that their desperation would lead them to make mistakes. And when it did, he would be ready. The desert was a merciless place, a vast expanse of sand and silence that seemed to stretch on forever. Judith, Philip, and Allan stumbled through the heat, their throats parched and their skin burning under the relentless sun. The single bottle of water Keller had left them was gone within hours, and the reality of their situation began to sink in. They argued at first, each blaming the other for how they'd ended up there. Judith screamed at Philip for his carelessness, while Allan accused Judith of leading them into this mess. But as the hours turned into days, their anger gave way to desperation. They tried to ration what little they had, but the desert offered no mercy. By the third day, hallucinations began to set in. Judith thought she saw an oasis in the distance, only to collapse in the sand when it vanished. Philip swore he heard Todd's voice taunting them, a cruel reminder of the life they'd left behind. Allan, the most resourceful of the three, tried to keep them moving, but even his determination wavered as dehydration and exhaustion took their toll. It was on the fifth day that they stumbled upon the abandoned gas station. It was a crumbling structure, barely standing, but to them, it was a lifeline. They scavenged for supplies, finding a few cans of food and a rusty knife. But the real discovery came when they found the car, an old, beat-up sedan with the keys still in the ignition. For the first time in days, they felt a glimmer of hope. They didn't stop to question why the car was there or how it had been left so conveniently. Desperation had stripped away their caution. They drove through the night, their spirits lifting as the desert gave way to the outskirts of a small town. But their relief was short-lived. The car broke down just as they reached the town limits, and their disheveled appearance drew immediate attention. A police officer approached, his hand resting on his holster as he asked for identification. Judith tried to explain, but her words came out in a jumbled mess. Philip, panicked, made a run for it, and Allan followed, leaving Judith to face the officer alone. What happened next was a blur. The officer called for backup, and within minutes, the town was swarming with police. Philip and Allan were caught trying to break into a convenience store, their faces gaunt and their eyes wild. Judith, still at the gas station, was found with a rusty knife in her hand, her desperation mistaken for aggression. The local news painted them as dangerous fugitives, their mugshots splashed across the screen with headlines like "Desert Bandits Caught in Dramatic Standoff." Back in the city, Todd watched the news unfold with a sense of grim satisfaction. He hadn't expected things to escalate so quickly, but he wasn't surprised. Desperation, he knew, had a way of bringing out the worst in people. Judith, Philip, and Allan were charged with multiple crimes: theft, breaking and entering, and assault. Their trial was swift, their defense weak. None of them mentioned Todd or the desert. They couldn't explain what had happened without sounding delusional, and by then, no one would have believed them anyway. As the judge handed down their sentences, Todd sat in his living room, the footage from his hidden cameras playing on a loop. He didn't smile or celebrate. He simply watched, his expression unreadable. They had taken everything from him, and now they had nothing. It was a fitting end, he thought. But as the screen went dark, a small part of him wondered if he'd gone too far. That thought, however, was quickly buried under the weight of his resolve. They had made their choices, and now they were paying the price. The months that followed were a strange mix of emptiness and clarity for Todd. With Judith, Philip, and Allan behind bars, the house felt unnervingly quiet, the silence a stark contrast to the chaos that had consumed his life. He spent his days working, burying himself in lines of code and complex algorithms, as if the precision of programming could somehow restore order to his fractured world. But at night, when the screens went dark and the house was still, the weight of what he'd done pressed down on him. He didn't regret his actions, not exactly. Judith, Philip, and Allan had betrayed him in the worst way possible, and they had paid the price. But as the initial rush of satisfaction faded, Todd began to question what he had become. The man who had once believed in hard work, loyalty, and second chances was gone, replaced by someone capable of orchestrating a plan so cold and calculated it still sent shivers down his spine. He avoided mirrors, afraid of the stranger staring back at him. The divorce papers arrived in the mail, a final severing of the life he had built with Judith. Todd signed them without hesitation, his signature a sharp, deliberate stroke of the pen. He sold the house soon after, unable to bear the memories that lingered in every room. The money from the sale went toward a fresh start, a small condo in Florida, far from the city and the people who had once been his world. The move was symbolic, a way of leaving the past behind and starting anew. Florida was different. The air smelled of salt and sunshine, and the pace of life was slower, quieter. Todd spent his mornings jogging along the beach, the rhythmic crash of the waves helping to clear his mind. He kept to himself, avoiding the friendly neighbors who waved hello and the coworkers who invited him out for drinks. He wasn't ready to trust again, not yet. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, he began to heal. One evening, as he sat on his balcony watching the sunset, Todd allowed himself to reflect on everything that had happened. He thought about Judith, Philip, and Allan, not with anger or hatred, but with a detached sense of closure. They had been a part of his life, a chapter that had ended in betrayal and retribution. But they were no longer his burden to carry. He had cut them out like pruning dead branches from a tree, and in doing so, he had made room for something new. Todd didn't know what the future held, and for the first time in a long time, that uncertainty didn't scare him. He had survived the worst betrayal imaginable, and he had come out on the other side stronger, if not unscarred. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Todd made a silent promise to himself. He would never let anyone take his power away again. And if anyone tried, they would learn the hard way that Todd wasn't just a victim, he was a survivor. As the dust settles on Todd's story, one question lingers like a shadow. Was it worth it? Todd's revenge was meticulous, calculated, and undeniably effective. Judith, Philip, and Allan are now serving time, their lives in ruins, while Todd has moved on, seemingly unscathed. But beneath the surface, the moral lines blur. Was Todd's punishment too extreme, or did they deserve every bit of it? The answer isn't simple. Consider Judith. She was Todd's wife, the woman he vowed to love and protect. Her betrayal cut deeper than anyone else's, but was her punishment, being stranded in the desert, arrested and imprisoned, proportional to her crime? Or did Todd's pain blind him to the humanity of the woman he once loved? Then there's Philip and Allan. They were Todd's childhood friends, the brothers he never had. Their betrayal was a double blow, but were they truly irredeemable? Did they deserve to lose their freedom and their futures? Or was Todd's revenge a reflection of his own pain rather than their actions? And what about Todd himself? He started as the victim, a man betrayed by the people closest to him. But in seeking revenge, did he become something worse? His plan was cold and calculated, devoid of the empathy that once defined him. Was he justified in taking the law into his own hands? Or should he have pursued legal avenues, no matter how unsatisfying they might have been? These questions don't have easy answers, and that's the point. Todd's story is a mirror, reflecting the complexities of human emotion and morality. It forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about justice, revenge, and the lengths we might go to when we're hurt. Was Todd's revenge a form of justice, or was it simply another act of betrayal, this time against his own humanity? As you reflect on Todd's journey, consider this. What would you have done in his place? Would you have walked away, seeking closure through forgiveness or the legal system? Or would you, like Todd, have taken matters into your own hands, driven by a desire for retribution? And perhaps the most haunting question of all, can revenge ever truly bring peace? Or does it only perpetuate the cycle of pain? Todd's story doesn't end with clear answers. It ends with a challenge to think, to question, and to confront the moral gray areas that define our lives. Because in the end, the choices we make in the face of betrayal reveal not just who we are, but who we're capable of becoming.